Daniel never thought his life would take such a strange turn. He was an ordinary human diplomat, chosen not for his power or fame, but for his calm voice and steady mind. When the message came that the Zayari kingdom had invited human representatives to attend a royal wedding, his name was placed on the list almost by accident. His superiors believed he was harmless enough not to cause trouble, yet polite enough to avoid insulting anyone. He boarded the starship with little expectation, imagining he would sit quietly in a corner, eat some unusual food, smile at the hosts, and then return home with nothing more than a few stories. But the moment he stepped onto the alien world, he realized how wrong he had been. The city shone like crystal towers, each glowing faintly as if filled with living light. The streets were wide and filled with beings taller and stronger than him, their skin marked with patterns that looked like both art and armor. The air carried the sound of drums and horns as the entire kingdom prepared for the great event. It was not just a wedding. It was a gathering of clans, warriors, and nobles from across the stars. Every guest seemed larger than life, and Daniel felt like a child wandering into a hall of giants. He was escorted into the palace, a building carved from stone so old it looked like it had been there since the birth of the world. Guards in shining armor led him through long corridors until he reached the grand hall. There, hundreds of guests stood waiting, dressed in flowing robes and glittering ornaments. At the far end of the hall sat the king of the Zayari, a massive figure with a crown that looked more like a weapon than a decoration. His eyes were sharp, glowing faintly, and his voice carried across the room even when he spoke softly. Beside him stood his daughter, the princess who was to be wed. Daniel could not help but notice her. Princess Sarilith was unlike the others. Her frame was strong, her posture proud, but her eyes held something different, curiosity, perhaps even mischief. While the other guests ignored the small human among them, she glanced at him more than once, her gaze lingering as though she wanted to understand him. Daniel tried not to meet her eyes, afraid it would be seen as rude, but something about her presence unsettled him. He reminded himself he was here only as a guest, nothing more. The hall filled with noise as the ceremony began. Strange chants rose, and alien instruments played notes that seemed to echo inside the bones rather than the ears. Daniel watched with fascination as the rituals unfolded. Gifts were exchanged, warriors performed dances with blades, and vows were spoken in the deep musical language of the Zayari. He did not understand a word, but he felt the weight of each moment. It was not a simple marriage between two people. It was a bond between clans, a promise of unity and strength. Then something unexpected happened. As the rituals grew more complex, Daniel found himself drawn into the flow of the ceremony. One of the attendants placed a cup in his hand, a vessel carved from crystal and filled with a glowing liquid. He assumed it was a simple offering for guests and raised it politely in respect. But the hall went silent as he did so. Eyes turned to him, whispers spread, and he realized too late that he had performed a gesture reserved for participants in the trials of the wedding. His harmless action was seen as a declaration, a willingness to step into the sacred rites that tested the worth of the suitors. Daniel's face burned with embarrassment. He tried to explain, but his words were drowned out by the booming laughter of nobles and the rising excitement of the crowd. The king raised an eyebrow, clearly amused, and the princess hid a small smile behind her hand. Daniel wanted to vanish, but it was too late. The ceremony had claimed him as part of its story. The first trial began. Warriors stepped forward, showing feats of strength by lifting great stones and breaking metal rods. Daniel stood frozen, wondering how long it would take before someone realized the mistake. Yet when his turn came, he surprised everyone. Instead of lifting a stone, he inspected it carefully and noticed that the shape allowed it to be rolled. With effort, he shifted it across the floor instead of straining to carry it. The crowd gasped, then roared with laughter and approval. To them, this strange little human had shown wit instead of muscle. It was unusual, but it fit the rules. Daniel wished he could sink into the floor. He had not come to compete, yet the aliens seemed delighted. Even the king leaned forward with interest while Sarilith's eyes sparkled with amusement. He felt trapped in a game he did not understand, but walking away would mean insulting their traditions. He could only continue and hope it would end soon. As the drums pounded and the next ritual prepared, Daniel realized he was no longer just a guest. He was now part of the wedding, bound to play a role in a ceremony far greater than himself. He could not yet guess that every step forward was leading him toward a fate stranger than any dream. "Oh, fate that would tie him not only to this kingdom but to the princess who watched him with such curious eyes. The hall was alive with sound as the second part of the ceremony unfolded. Daniel stood at the center, his heart racing. He had not meant to be here, but now every eye was on him. The Xiari nobles spoke quickly in their deep voices, and though he could not understand their words, he could sense the energy. They were eager to see what the human would do next. He had already surprised them once, and they wanted more. An elder stepped forward carrying a long staff carved with glowing runes. He struck it against the stone floor and the crowd fell silent. In the alien tongue, he announced the next trial. Daniel did not know the exact words, but the meaning soon became clear. Several tall warriors walked to the center, each carrying a strange puzzle made of metal rings and glowing stones. They placed one of the puzzles before him, its pieces locked together in a twisted knot. Daniel looked at the puzzle in confusion. The warriors quickly solved theirs by snapping the heavy rings apart with brute force, showing their strength to the crowd. The audience cheered for them, and then all attention turned to Daniel. He tried to lift the puzzle, but it was too heavy for him to break apart the way they had. His hand slipped on the metal and a murmur went through the hall. He felt heat rise in his cheeks. If he failed now, it might shame not only him but his entire people. But then he remembered his training as a diplomat. He had always been taught that when force did not work, words or thought must take its place. He crouched low and studied the puzzle carefully. He noticed that the stones were connected by grooves, and the rings could slide if moved in a certain order. While the warriors had used strength, he used patience and logic. One by one, he shifted the pieces until the puzzle fell apart in his hands. The hall erupted in cheers. The nobles clapped their hands, and the warriors looked at him with wide eyes. For them, the puzzle was a test of power, but Daniel had shown a different path. He had solved it without breaking it, proving that humans could find answers in ways the Xiari had not considered. The king leaned back in his throne, his expression thoughtful, while Sarilith smiled openly now, her eyes shining with excitement. Daniel bowed slightly, trying to be respectful, though his heart pounded with fear. He did not want to continue, yet he knew there was no way to escape without dishonor. He whispered to himself, "Just stay calm. Do what you can. Survive this." The next part of the ceremony involved words. The elder raised the staff again and spoke in a slow rhythm. Daniel could not understand the language, but an attendant whispered the translation into his ear through a small device. This was the trial of promises, a ritual where each participant declared loyalty, dreams, or oaths before the court. It was meant to show their inner strength. The warriors spoke first, their voices loud and full of pride. One promised to win 100 battles. Another swore to protect the kingdom with his life. A third declared that his family's honor would shine brighter than the stars. Each vow was greeted with approval. Then it was Daniel's turn. He froze for a moment, unsure what to say. He was not a warrior, and he could not promise victory in battles he would never fight. He could not speak of honor in a way that matched their grand style. But he thought of what mattered most to him, and when he opened his mouth, his voice was steady. "I am only a guest here," he said slowly. "I have no strength like yours, and I cannot fight as you do. But I can promise this. If ever there is a time when my voice, my mind, or my hands can help, I will not turn away. I may be small among you, but I will stand with those I call friends. That is my vow." For a moment, the hall was silent. Then the crowd broke into a strange sound. Not laughter, not cheering, but something between. The Xiari were surprised, perhaps even moved. His vow was simple, but it carried honesty. It was not about glory, but about loyalty, and that was something their people valued deeply. The king nodded slowly, and the elder struck the staff once more, marking the vow as accepted. Sarilith's gaze never left him. She seemed to study every word, every gesture, as though she were trying to solve a puzzle of her own. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under her stare. He told himself she was only curious, nothing more. But there was a spark in her expression that made him uneasy, as if she already knew something he did not. The ceremony moved on, and Daniel was allowed to step aside for a moment. He breathed deeply, his hands shaking from the weight of attention. He wished he could vanish into the crowd, but he knew now that he was caught in something larger than himself. What had started as a mistake was turning into a path he could not escape. As the drums grew louder and the next challenge was prepared, Daniel's thoughts spun. He wondered how long this would last, how many trials he would be forced to endure, and what would happen when it was over. What he did not know was that each step he took was pulling him closer to a fate he could not yet imagine. The wedding was no longer a distant event he had come to watch. It was becoming his story, whether he wished it or not. The drums beat faster, shaking the floor of the grand hall. Daniel stood among the towering warriors, his chest tight with nerves. He had passed the first trials by accident and quick thinking, but now he wondered if luck would finally abandon him. The elder raised his staff once more, and a hush fell over the crowd. This trial, Daniel soon realized, was unlike the others. The translation device whispered in his ear. This was the test of courage. Each participant had to face a challenge before the court to prove they had the heart of a protector. It was a ritual that showed whether a suitor could defend the bride's honor and stand firm even when fear was strongest. For the Zyari, it was the most respected of all trials. One by one, the warriors stepped forward. Each was given a weapon and an opponent. They clashed with steel that sparked under the hall's lights. The fights were short but fierce, ending with loud cheers and the stamping of feet. The crowd admired displays of strength and skill, shouting the names of the fighters. When each warrior bowed after victory, the hall shook with approval. Then it was Daniel's turn. The elder called his name in the alien tongue, and the crowd turned to watch the small human walk to the center of the arena floor. He swallowed hard, his palms sweating. He had no weapon, no armor, and no training to fight like these towering beings. His opponent stepped forward, a Zyari warrior dressed in ceremonial armor, holding a long blade that glowed faintly at the edges. The warrior bowed respectfully, but his eyes carried doubt. To him, Daniel was not a rival, but a fragile creature who did not belong here. Daniel was handed a weapon too, a long staff heavier than he expected. He gripped it awkwardly, knowing that a real fight would end quickly. He looked up at the warrior and saw the challenge in his stance. The drums thundered again and the trial began. The warrior moved first, fast and powerful. Daniel barely managed to step aside, the blade missing him by inches. The crowd shouted, expecting the human to fall immediately. But Daniel remembered the first trials. He had not needed strength then, and he would not need it now. He focused not on fighting back, but on surviving. Each time the warrior struck, Daniel dodged, shifted, or used the staff to deflect just enough to avoid the full force. He felt clumsy, but he also noticed something. The warrior grew frustrated. The harder he pressed, the more Daniel slipped away. The fight turned from a display of power into a contest of patience. At last, Daniel saw his chance. When the warrior lunged forward, overcommitted to a strike, Daniel swung the staff low, hitting the warrior's legs. The giant stumbled, falling to one knee. The hall gasped in shock. Daniel quickly dropped his staff, refusing to strike again. He raised his hands and stepped back, showing he had no wish to harm his opponent. The silence broke into loud cheers. The crowd clapped and shouted, not because he had defeated the warrior, but because he had shown something different. He had faced danger without fear, used his mind instead of brute force, and still earned respect. To the Zyari, courage was not only about strength, it was about standing firm in the face of challenge. The elder struck his staff to mark the trial complete. The warrior rose, bowed to Daniel, and the two shared a brief nod of respect. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift in the room. The nobles no longer saw him as a weak outsider. They saw him as someone who had earned his place, even if only for a moment. The king studied him with sharp eyes. He leaned closer to his advisors, speaking in low tones, but his expression was difficult to read. Princess Sarilith, however, made no attempt to hide her thoughts. Her smile was clear, her gaze fixed on Daniel with a spark of admiration. It unsettled him even more than the fight had. Daniel stepped back, his heart still racing. He knew he had been lucky. If the warrior had been less patient, if he had slipped once, it would have ended in disaster. But luck or not, the trial was over and he had survived. As the ceremony continued, Daniel found it harder to breathe easily. He had not come here to compete, yet the crowd now expected more of him. Each trial bound him deeper into their traditions, and though he did not yet understand the full meaning, He could sense that every step was leading to something far greater than he intended. The hall returned to music and chanting, the rituals moving forward as if nothing unusual had happened. But Daniel knew something had changed. He had been a guest at first, a stranger to their customs, but now he was no longer just an observer. He was a player in their most sacred traditions, and whether he wanted it or not, the story of this wedding had claimed him. In the quiet between the chants, Sarilith's voice reached him. She spoke softly, her words translated into his ear by the device. "You fight strangely, human, not with power but with mind. I think that is why you will not be forgotten." Daniel did not know how to answer. He only bowed his head slightly, too aware of how dangerous her attention could be. The ceremony was not finished, and already he feared where it might lead. The next trial waited, and with it, a truth he could not yet imagine, that the wedding he had come to watch would soon become his own. The hall glowed with light from hundreds of torches and crystals as the final part of the wedding ceremony began. Daniel stood among the warriors, still shaken from the last trial. His heart beat fast, but he told himself the worst was over. Surely now the attention would turn back to the true suitors and the princess. He had survived long enough, and soon he could fade into the background again. At least that was what he hoped. The elder raised his staff high and silence fell. His voice filled the room with a deep rhythm, every word carrying weight. Daniel listened through the translation device. The elder declared that the trials were complete, and the one who had shown the greatest worth would now be joined to the princess in sacred union. The crowd stirred with excitement. Warriors stood straighter, each one expecting to be chosen. The nobles leaned forward in anticipation. Daniel only half listened at first. His eyes were on the princess. Sarilith stood tall beside her father, her crown gleaming, her expression unreadable. For a moment her gaze met his, and he quickly looked away, embarrassed by the thought that she might notice him again. Then the elder spoke the name. Daniel froze. He thought he had heard wrong, but the translation confirmed it. The elder had spoken his name. The hall erupted with noise. Some gasped, some laughed, some shouted in disbelief. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him as though the entire palace had tilted. He raised his hands, shaking his head, trying to protest. No, there's a mistake," he said, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The elder repeated the words clearly. By the law of tradition, the one who had proven most worthy through the trials was Daniel, the human. And by that same law, he was now the rightful husband of Princess Sarilith. Daniel's mouth went dry. His legs felt weak and he nearly stumbled backward. He wanted to refuse, to shout that he had never agreed, but his mind raced with fear. To reject the sacred custom might be seen as an insult to the king himself, an insult to the entire Xiari people. He could already feel hundreds of eyes burning into him, waiting to see what he would do. The king rose from his throne, towering above everyone else. His eyes were sharp and heavy with thought. For a long moment he said nothing, only studied the human who now stood frozen in the center of the hall. At last his deep voice rolled across the chamber. "The law is clear. The trials have spoken, though unexpected, the choice is binding." The hall quieted, every noble and warrior hanging on his words. The king turned to his daughter. "Do you accept the will of tradition, Sarilith?" All eyes turned to the princess. She stood calm, though Daniel could see a storm behind her eyes. Slowly she stepped forward. Her voice was steady, yet soft. "I accept." The crowd erupted again, half in shock, half in awe. The marriage was sealed by her words. Daniel, who had come only as a guest, was now the husband of the king's daughter. His mind spun. He wanted to run, to vanish, to escape the weight that had just fallen on him. But there was nowhere to go. Guards stood at every exit, and nobles pressed closer to watch. The elder moved forward, carrying a thin band of glowing silver. He placed it in Daniel's hand and then gave another to Sarilith. She slipped hers onto her wrist with grace, while Daniel fumbled nervously with his. When it closed around his wrist, it pulsed with a faint light. The bond was complete. The king raised his arms, declaring the union to all. "Let it be known," he said, "that the trials have chosen and my daughter is wed. The bond between Sarilith and Daniel, child of humanity, is now art of the history of our people." The hall thundered with drums and horns, but Daniel barely heard them. His thoughts were too loud. He looked at Sarilith, who now stood at his side. She was calm, her head held high, but when she glanced at him there was no mockery in her eyes. Instead, there was curiosity, perhaps even a small flicker of respect. He whispered to her in a shaky voice, "I didn't mean for this to happen." Her lips curved slightly, almost into a smile. "Neither did I, but now it has. And you will have to learn quickly if you are to stand beside me." Daniel could only nod, though his stomach twisted. The cheers of the hall washed over him, but he felt no triumph. This was not victory. It was the beginning of something he could not yet understand. As the celebration began, nobles crowded around to see the human who had taken the trials and won. Some laughed, some praised, and some whispered with scorn. Daniel could feel their judgment in every glance. He realized that not all were pleased with the outcome. Many had expected their own warriors to win. Many now saw him as an intruder who had stolen what was theirs. The king seemed to sense the tension, but allowed none to speak against it. His word was final, and the law was unbroken. Yet Daniel could not shake the feeling that the true test was only beginning. He had become the husband of the princess, but whether he could survive in this world of strength and power was a question that no ritual could answer. As the music played and the feasting began, Daniel sat beside Sarilith at the high table. He kept his head low, feeling out of place among the glittering nobles. Yet when he dared to look at her again, she met his gaze calmly. Her words returned to him, "You will have to learn quickly." In that moment, Daniel understood one thing clearly. His life was no longer his own. The wedding he had come to watch had made him part of the Scifi forever. And whatever waited in the days to come, he could not turn back. The wedding feast stretched long into the night. The hall glittered with gold banners, glowing crystals, and the voices of nobles who raised their cups in honor of the union. Music filled the air, heavy with drums and deep horns, while warriors told stories of past battles. To the Scifi, it was a night of triumph. To Daniel, it felt like a dream that had slipped out of his control. He sat beside Princess Sarilith at the high table. Her posture was perfect, her head high, and every movement carried dignity. She accepted the congratulations of her people with a calm smile, though Daniel could sense she was watching him carefully. Each time he shifted uncomfortably or reached for food with hesitation, her eyes flickered with quiet amusement. Daniel tried to eat, but the dishes were strange. The meats shimmered with colors he had never seen, the drinks glowed faintly, and the spices burned his tongue. He forced himself to smile and nod politely when others spoke to him, but inside he felt lost. He was no longer a guest. He was now part of their royal family, and every noble knew it. Not everyone was pleased. Across the table, Daniel noticed a group of warriors whispering among themselves. Their eyes burned with anger as they looked at him. One of them, tall and broad, slammed his cup down loudly and muttered words that even without translation carried insult. Daniel lowered his gaze, pretending not to hear, but the unease stayed with him. Later, when the feast ended, Sarilith led him through the palace corridors. The guards followed at a distance, their heavy footsteps echoing on the stone. The princess walked with steady grace, saying nothing until they reached a chamber filled with tall windows that looked out over the city. The towers glowed in the darkness, and the streets below pulsed with the energy of celebration. "This is your new home," she said at last, her voice calm but firm. "From this day you are bound to me and to the Scifi." Daniel turned toward her, his voice low. "I never wanted this. I only came as a guest. I didn't even understand what I was doing." Her eyes narrowed, but there was no cruelty in her gaze. "And yet the trials chose you. Our people respect the law. You stood in the place of a suitor and you did not fall. Do you think that means nothing?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't belong here. I'm not like your people. I don't have strength or honor like your warriors." Sarilith stepped closer, her tone sharper now. "You are wrong. You showed a different kind of strength. You did not lift the stone, yet you moved it. You did not break the puzzle, yet you solved it. You did not strike down your opponent, yet you stood with courage. That is why they speak your name tonight. You proved that strength is not only in the body." Her words struck him, but he still felt the weight of doubt. Even if that is true, your people do not all accept me. I saw their faces. Some hate that I am here. Sarilith's expression softened just slightly. Yes, many are angry. They expected a great warrior to stand beside me, not a human with soft hands. They will test you. They will watch for weakness. If you stumble, they will call you unworthy. Daniel swallowed hard. Then what should I do? She looked out over the city before answering. You must learn. You must show them that your ways have value. I will not protect you from their scorn, but I will walk beside you. If you can endure, if you can prove yourself, they will respect you. The silence stretched between them. Daniel looked at her and saw not only a princess, but a woman who carried the weight of an entire kingdom. She had not chosen him either, yet she did not complain. She accepted her duty with pride. The days that followed were difficult. Daniel found himself caught in a clash of worlds. At meals, he stumbled with alien etiquette, earning laughs from the nobles. In the training grounds, warriors mocked his lack of strength. Even the servants looked at him with curiosity, unsure if he was a ruler or an outsider. But he tried. He asked questions, studied their customs, and listened when Sarilith explained the meanings of their traditions. He learned how to greet nobles with the proper bow, how to hold the ceremonial staff during rituals, and even how to spar lightly with a blade. He failed often, but each failure taught him something new. Sarilith tested him constantly. One morning, she asked him to face a warrior in a debate about honor. Another time, she challenged him to navigate the complex map of noble families. At first, Daniel resented these trials, but slowly he realized she was preparing him. She wanted him to stand beside her not as a shadow, but as a partner. Still, the threats did not fade. The warriors who had lost in the trials grew more hostile. Daniel overheard whispers of revenge, of schemes to disgrace him. Some claimed the law had been twisted, that the trials were not meant for a human. He began to feel the danger around him, sharp and cold like a blade in the dark. Yet in the quiet moments when the palace halls grew still, he and Sarilith spoke more openly. She asked about Earth, about the lives of humans, and about why they valued peace as much as war. He told her stories of his childhood, of simple joys and struggles. She listened closely, her proud face softening when she heard of things beyond her world. The bond between them was slow, built not on choice but on understanding. She began to respect his honesty, and he began to see the strength in her that went beyond her warrior's pride. They were different, but together, they were learning to walk a new path. Daniel knew their union was fragile, tested by eyes that wanted him gone. But he also knew something else. If he gave up, he would prove those whispers right. If he stood firm, he might change not only his own fate, but the way the Zyari saw humanity. And so, in the heart of an alien palace, a marriage that began by accident became the spark of something greater. A clash of worlds had begun, and Daniel understood that he had no choice but to face it. The days in the alien palace grew heavier, as whispers turned into shadows that followed Daniel wherever he went. At first, the muttering of the warriors had been small and hidden, but soon it became louder, slipping into the open halls where even the servants could hear. To them, he was still an outsider, a human who had somehow won what many had dreamed of but failed to reach. To Daniel, it was like walking across thin ice, with cracks spreading beneath his every step. One evening, while studying the history scrolls that Sarilith had given him, Daniel noticed a figure standing by the doorway. It was not one of the usual guards. The man wore the crest of a rival noble house, his sharp eyes filled with dislike. "You should not sit there so comfortably," the warrior said in a low voice. "Many stronger than you fell in those trials. Do you think fate was kind, or was it tricked?" Daniel closed the scroll slowly, his heart thudding. He had learned not to answer insults with anger, but calmness was difficult when the air itself felt poisoned. "I only did what I could," he said softly. "The trials judged me, not you," the warrior sneered. "The trials can be bent. Perhaps the princess wished for a weak man she could control. Perhaps you are no husband, only her puppet." With that, he turned and left, his boots striking the floor like hammers. Daniel sat in silence long after he was gone, the words echoing in his head. Doubt was a wound, and these men knew how to cut deep with it. Later that night, Sarilith entered the chamber and saw his troubled face. She stood by the window where the moon shone pale light across the floor. "They spoke to you again, didn't they?" she asked quietly. Daniel nodded. "They don't believe in me. They think I cheated or that you arranged it. Sarilith's eyes hardened. They fear change. The old ways told the Im's strength was only in muscle and blade. You broke that belief. When something shatters, sharp pieces remain, and those pieces can cut. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. But what if they're right? What if I don't belong here? She turned sharply toward him, her voice fierce. Do not say that again. You belong because the law says so, and because I stand with you. If they want to fight against that, they fight against me too, and they know I do not bend easily. Her strength gave Daniel comfort, but it did not erase the fear. He wondered how long her support could shield him before the enemies grew bold enough to strike at both of them. The very next day, boldness showed itself. During a gathering in the Hall of Blades where nobles and warriors trained and debated, one of the strongest champions stepped forward. His name was Vorath, a scarred veteran with eyes as sharp as steel. He pointed directly at Daniel before the crowd. This human wears the crown of our law, Vorath declared, yet he has never faced the fire of true combat. I challenge him here and now. If he falls, let it be proof he is unworthy. If he somehow stands, then perhaps we will see him as more than a shadow. The hall erupted in shouts. Some cheered the challenge, others muttered against it, but all eyes turned to Sarilith. She could not forbid a challenge without appearing weak. Slowly she rose and spoke with calm authority. The law does not demand he fight as you fight. If you want to test him, it will be by his way, not yours. Vorath laughed harshly. Then let him choose his way. Let us see if humans even have a way at all. Daniel's heart pounded. He was no warrior, and he knew it. But to refuse would be to lose everything he had tried to build. He thought of Earth, of the things his people valued: cleverness, endurance, patience. Slowly he stepped forward and said, I will face you, but not with blades. With wits, the crowd murmured in surprise. Vorath sneered, but pride forced him to accept. Then tell us, human, what game will decide this? Daniel breathed deeply. A puzzle of strategy. A board of stones, black and white. Each move builds or destroys. It is a game of patience and foresight. If you defeat me, I will bow before you. If I win, you will recognize my place. The game was brought forth that very night. A wide board was laid between them, and the stones clicked as they placed them one by one. At first, Vorath was confident, rushing to surround Daniel's pieces. But Daniel had played such games since childhood. He was not the strongest, but he had learned to see patterns, to predict moves, to wait until the right moment. The hall grew tense as the battle of stones stretched long into the night. Sweat beaded on Vorath's forehead as his traps collapsed one by one. Daniel, calm despite his racing heart, placed his last stone with quiet certainty. The board showed it clearly. Vorath had lost. Silence fell. Then murmurs began spreading through the crowd like fire. Some were shocked, others angry, but none could deny what they had seen. Vorath rose, his pride burning, yet the law bound him. He bowed stiffly. By the stones I yield. The human has won. Daniel's breath trembled, but he stood tall. He had not fought with blade or muscle, but he had fought with the strength he carried, and before the eyes of the nobles he had proved something undeniable. That night Sarilith spoke to him with rare softness. You showed them what it means to be human. You did not try to become one of us. You stood as yourself. Remember that, Daniel. It is your greatest weapon. But even as she spoke, shadows stirred in corners. Not all would accept this outcome. Defeat only fueled anger, and anger could turn into something far more dangerous. The true test was not yet over. The palace felt calmer after the game of stones, but Daniel knew it was only a thin layer over a storm. Vorath had yielded, but his eyes had burned with humiliation, and humiliation was a dangerous fire. Others who had doubted Daniel now watched him more carefully, as if waiting for him to slip. Sarilith had told him victory often created as many enemies as defeat, and he was beginning to understand her words. One night, as the moons hung low and the palace was quiet, Daniel woke to a strange sound. At first he thought it was only the wind against the crystal towers. Then he heard it again, a whisper of steel sliding from its sheath. He sat up quickly, and the glow of a blade caught his eye. A figure dressed in dark armor stood inside the chamber. The intruder had bypassed the guard somehow and was moving toward the bed where Sarilith slept. Without thinking, Daniel lunged forward. His hands grabbed a chair and swung it with all the strength he had. The chair crashed into the intruder, knocking him aside, but not down. The clash woke Sarilith, who rolled away just as the blade struck where she had been lying. Her eyes widened when she saw the assassin. She leapt to her feet, her training making her movements sharp and sure. Daniel, however, was clumsy, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would burst. The assassin was strong and skilled, and soon Daniel was backed into a corner. He tried to block another swing with the broken chair, but the weapon sliced it in half. Just as the blade rose for a final strike, Sarilith grabbed a spear from the wall and threw it with perfect aim. The assassin staggered, wounded, and crashed to the floor. Guards burst into the room moments later, too late to stop the fight. When the mask was pulled away, the assassin's face revealed the crest of House Vorath. The hall filled with gasps and whispers spread like wildfire. The king himself arrived, his face grave. He looked at Daniel and Sarilith, then at the dead assassin. "This is no small crime," he said, his voice heavy. "This is not only against my daughter, but against our law. To strike at the bond is treason." Daniel stood shaking, not from fear alone, but from the weight of what this meant. He had faced danger before, but this was the first time he realized that his marriage to Sarilith was not just unwanted by some. It was seen as a threat worth killing for. In the days that followed, the palace grew tense. Trials were held to uncover the plot. It became clear that Vorath and several nobles had conspired, not only to challenge Daniel but to remove him entirely. Their fear was simple. If a human could rise so high, then the old lines of power could break forever. During the trial, Vorath was forced to stand before the king. His face carried no shame, only fury. "You let a weak outsider take what should be ours," he shouted. "He is no warrior, no true mate of your daughter. He makes a mockery of us all." The king's voice thundered in reply. "The law is greater than pride. The trials chose him, and he proved his strength not by your measure but by his own. That is the way of true honor. You have broken the law by seeking his blood, and for that you will pay." The judgment was final. Vorath and his allies were stripped of rank, their lands taken, their names marked in disgrace. Some were sent into exile beyond the borders of the kingdom. It was a harsh punishment, but the king made it clear. Tradition was sacred, and no one could destroy it for their own ambition. For Daniel, the days after the trial were heavy with thought. He had not wanted power, yet power had been forced onto him. He had not wanted to fight, yet fights kept coming. He sat by the garden pools one evening, staring into the water when Sarilith joined him. "You look like the world is too heavy for your shoulders," she said gently. Daniel sighed. "I came here just to watch a wedding. Now I'm part of one that almost got me killed. I don't know if I can keep doing this." Sarilith looked at him with calm strength. "Do you think I asked for this? I never thought my husband would be human. But the law joined us, and now fate ties us together. You are not alone in this. What you lack in strength, you carry in heart. That is why they fear you, because you are not what they expect and you refuse to break." Her words touched him more than she knew. Daniel had felt like a stranger in their world, but in that moment he understood that his presence had already changed things. He was not just surviving. He was shaping the way the Xiari saw humans, perhaps even themselves. That night the king summoned him privately. The king's eyes were sharp, but there was a glimmer of respect within them. "You defended my daughter with no blade in your hand. You faced challenges with no armor but your mind. I see now why the trials chose you. Perhaps you were not meant to be here by accident. Perhaps you were meant to show us something we had forgotten." Daniel bowed his head. "I don't know what I can give, but I'll try." The king placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "That is enough. Remember this, Daniel. Strength is many things, and sometimes the smallest flame can change the darkness of an entire hall." From that day forward, the whispers did not vanish, but they changed. Some still doubted him, but others began to see him as more than just a mistake of tradition. He was human, yes, but he was also a husband, a protector, and a voice that could not be silenced. Daniel realized his journey had only begun. The wedding that was never meant to be had turned into something greater, a bond that challenged a kingdom and might one day reshape it.